Thank you. Well, let me ask you a question. This is one of the things I've been talking to Jonathan about, is to have a planning committee to see what needs to be done in our Bible studies and other things. And so this is about as close as we've got, and I want to make sure that I'm on target. Let me mention something to you that the normal way that I have been doing this for the last 35, 40 years is we use a book, and it's like Master Life, and I don't think anybody in here has done Master Life, so I don't think you're familiar with it, except Jonathan maybe, or Experiencing God. And I still have this in the back of my mind. It may be something totally different for you, but what we did is we would have a Bible study like this for an hour and a half. I think I've mentioned that once or twice. And everybody would sign a card that you would do 2 or 3 things. One is you'd do the lesson every day, which would take about 30 minutes each day. And then we would not, what we talked about in the meeting, we wouldn't talk about outside the meeting. Everything stayed inside the meeting. And we memorized 2 verses a week. We did a Bible study once a week, and we witnessed to somebody once a week, and we did a couple of other things, and we all signed that commitment. Now that's the reason that sometimes I'll ask, what have you done this week? Or what's going on this week? Because I'm so used to getting that feedback. And there was one fellow that he was a dentist. He was about 40 years old. He was in the church in Rio, in the Master Life group in Rio. And he would come in and he wouldn't have his verses memorized. And but he wasn't anything wrong with him. And so after about the second or third week that he came in with not his verses memorized, I said, you know, I am kind of concerned about you. I said, because you're only 40 years old and you tell me you can't memorize 2 verses a week. If you keep on going this, you're not going to even remember your name in another 3 or 4 years, because your mind is just going to turn to mush. And now you might think that is a little strong, but sometimes a person needs a little encouragement. Well, next year he came with everything memorized. He said, you scared me last week. And I said, well, and then we had another situation in another class. I don't think I've mentioned this before, but anyway, this one lady in there, she talked all the time. And I had other people, and it was in seminary class. And you know, they were paying to go to the seminary, and this was one of the classes that we had, and she just talked all the time. Nobody could get a word in edgewise. And they were coming up to me and telling me, I said, if you don't stop her from talking, we're quitting. We're not going to come back if you don't be able to stop her from talking. That doesn't happen very often, but it does. And so one day she took off. I mean, it was just like a machine gun. She never stopped. And finally she took a breath, and she was talking about all the problems she had. And I asked her, she said, I asked God, why am I having all these problems? And she paused for just a second. And I said, well, what did God tell you? She said, well, he didn't tell me anything. And I said, well, if you talk to him while you talk to us here, he didn't get a word in edgewise.
Good intro.
Well, it wasn't the spur of the moment, because I've been praying about it for about 2 weeks. And so what I did last week, or 2 weeks ago, when we were talking about storytelling, that's something that I would not normally do in a group like this, because we do have to practice. And as I've been in this group for a while, I have found that this is not a practice group. I'm just telling you what I've experienced. It's not a practice group. So what I would like to do is to find another time outside of this group to do some serious study and training in witnessing and in training. Now, like I mentioned last week, I believe I mentioned last week that was one of my jobs at Brentwood, and we would meet for 4 weeks for an hour and a half on Wednesday night, and we'd go for 4 weeks doing evangelism training. And then that was level 1. And then we'd come back a little bit later and do level 2 for the same thing for an hour and a half for 4 weeks, and then level 3. So we just kept it going over and over and over again. And one of my responsibilities that they wanted me to do is to increase adult baptism. Well, one time we did get it double almost in adult baptism. But it takes more than what we're doing here. It takes more than this. It takes learning and practicing. So you don't need to tell me right now, but I do need to know if we would like to have another time before or after, or another week, or another day of the week to learn how. I know Shirley likes the story of the feeding of the 5,000. But what happens if we were to read, now this is how we did this at storytelling. There's a whole lot more in depth than what even evangelism training, because that went 5 hours a day for 6 weeks, storytelling. And they got really good. But suppose we were to do a storytelling. If we were to do, say, the story of the feeding of the 5,000, we start here with Connie. We read it. You read the story 7 times in 3 different translations before you started. Okay, then we come back and, okay, Connie, tell us the story. Steve, you tell it. Jonathan, you tell it. You tell it. You tell it. Tell it. We go all the way around the circle. Everybody has to tell it. Now, the biggest problem is that the person, the first time, it may not be the best. But like Steve Stringer, I think I said Steve Springer last week. Jerry Springer, but Steve you never tell it right the first time. You never tell it right the first time. So what that means is you have to tell it right sometime. You have to start telling it. Now, studies have shown, the IMB and other people have shown that Bible storytelling is the best way to witness. It's the best way to share the gospel. I've told some of my experiences in here. You talk to somebody, like you did talk with this lady here several months ago, and I think you asked her what her favorite Bible study was, or she told you or something, wasn't it? Don, a few months ago, several months ago, didn't that happen?
It was a man. You
Oh, it
talked
was
to a
God.
guy over
Yeah.
here.
It was at Room at the End also.
What now?
It was people from Room at the End also.
Oh, well, that's great.
Also the voting man.
Yeah, guy carrying the voting things out.
Yeah, that's what it was.
And so it's real easy to walk up to somebody and say, what is your favorite Bible story? You find a lot of information out. You find, are they willing to, do they have one? That means they've had some contact with the church. And then you can start telling yours. Now, the thing about it is, you've got to have one. You've got to have one. And that's what my goal, other than just giving a Bible study once a week, is for people to come out with some skill, some ability to do something. Because that is the biggest reason why churches grow or don't grow, is whether or not the members have a skill of doing something. And so I know that if the church is going to grow, you've got to have a skill. You've got to have some kind of skill, some kind of ability to do something. And so I'm going to get some feedback. I mean, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing here, but my main goal is to be able to equip, because that's what Ephesians 4 said, for the equipping of the saints. For the equipping of the saints. So my question is, how have I equipped you to do something outside the walls of the church? If a pastor, apostle, pastor, teacher, evangelist, whoever those 4 people are there in Ephesians 4, haven't equipped the members for the work of the ministry, then all he's done is talk for 30 minutes a week. That's not the purpose of the leadership of the church. It's not just to talk for a while, but to see transformation and to equip. And so I know that sounds like a little bit of a frustration, but my excitement has been over the years as to see people when they lead somebody to the Lord, when they share the gospel. They may not lead that person to Christ, but sooner or later they will. Now, here is what Paul says in in Thessalonians chapter 1. This is what I like so much about this. We touched on it last week, 2 weeks ago, when Paul, there in Thessalonians, only just a few weeks, 3 Sabbath days, he said, you became an example, and from you sounded out the word of the Lord, not only in Macedonia and Achaia, but everywhere I go, I run into somebody that says, I know Joe from back over to your church. He tells me what you've done. He tells me how you have come to Christ. So all I've got to do is just kind of tie up the loose ends. Now, if somebody were to go witnessing in this neighborhood, around your house, or around here, would they say, oh, I know Sarah over there. Yeah, she's a member of your church. She already talked to me about Jesus. But there's a few problems that I've got with it. I just don't understand this, that, and the other. Now, that's what's going to take to grow the church. That's what's going to take to grow the kingdom of God, is for that to happen. Now, the question I've got is how can you be motivated to do that? How can we be motivated to do that? Well, one is, Jesus said, follow me and I will make you a fisher of men. I will make you that. So a follower of Jesus is a fisher of men. That's what a follower of Jesus is. So we can't say I'm a follower of Jesus, but I'm not fishing men. But I'm not fishing. I don't do any fishing. But nobody's ever showed me how. I remember a situation. I was on a deep sea boat out in the Gulf many years ago, and it was was very funny. There was some fish following around in the back of the boat. They were on top of the water, just floating, just jumping up and down, all over the back of the boat. Now, we were supposed to be fishing for redfish at the bottom. It's about 60 foot deep. So there was a 2-pound weight on that line, and you pushed the little button on the reel, that thing went down 60 feet. And then you brought it back up. Well, these people were at the back of the boat, and they were throwing that 2-pound weight at those fish. The only way they'd have caught one if it had hit it in the head. And so the captain or the deckhand came down. He cut all that weight off. He cut all that stuff off. And he re-rigged everything to fish on top of the water. And he threw the line out there, and seemed to me like just less than a couple of minutes, he had a couple of those fish in the boat, because he knew how to fish for that fish. There's a lot of fish out in the area of people, and you can't fish for them the same way. You can't share the gospel the same way with every person. It takes not only does it take a different method, a different strategy, but it also takes different people. Every one of you will share the gospel differently. You will do it different. Nobody's going to do it the same. Somebody's going to share the gospel like a teacher will. Somebody's going to share the gospel a little more authoritative. Some of it's going to be a little more softer. It's going to be all over the place. But that's what it takes. A person's going to need to hear the gospel several times. Now, the reason I'm doing this, saying this, is it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter to me. Well, it does, but it doesn't matter as much as what I'm about to say. That if you think the pastor's going to come and do this, he's not. That's not going to happen. But what I look for is you going out and being a witness, regardless of what happens here, where God puts you, where you're going, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be that witness anywhere, everywhere. So you're not tied. That's one of the things that I did in Brazil. I didn't spend a lot of time working with organizations or buildings or structures, because I knew, and we did build several buildings, but I knew that sooner or later every building we built was going to be torn down. That's just a fact of life. It may happen 10 years, 50 years, 20 years, 100 years, but everything's going to be changed. Every organization's going to be changed. I think in the back of my mind I may have mentioned this, but I was working with one missionary, and he spent a lot of time working on a particular organization. He spent hours and years doing it. When it came time for him to go home, retire, leave. Well, he had that great big thick notebook that he'd been working on for years. And he handed it to the person that was going to take his place. And I was there. And she looked at this, she said, I don't know how to do this. She chucked the whole thing right in the garbage with 30 seconds. Half of everything he had done had finished by the time he got on the airplane in Rio, and the other half finished when he landed in Miami. That's a fact of life. The only thing that we do that lasts forever is somebody we lead to Christ. Everything else goes away. That's the only thing we do. So that's one of the motivations, is the idea to be able to do that. Now, I'm ready to do that if y'all want to do that. But it will be a little bit of work. And we will do some studying and do some accountability. That's one thing that's a part of every discipleship program out there, is accountability. What did you do? Tell me what happened. Tell me how you experienced it. What happened? There's one group of, I'm not going to mention their name because they're a little bit on a rigid side, but they had a group years ago, just shortly after World War II, and they would have a meeting like this, and in their discipleship plan, and the leader would say, look, if you're 15 minutes late next week, don't worry about coming back the next week. You know, and so in other words, they had a very high standard of accountability going on, and so I won't be that bad. But I would like to, I could work on one-on-one if you want to. One time I worked with just 2 people, and that guy is still going on. But to be able to equip to do something, if you took a piano lesson or guitar lesson or something, the first thing the teacher would do the next time, play me that song we dealt with last week. Let me hear you play it. Can you do it? And if you say, well, I didn't have any time to do it. Well, even though you're paying me, I don't have any time to teach you either. So, in other words, there's got to be some kind of accountability, and there's got to be some kind of learning. Now, I'm more than ready to do that, if you want me to. And then we'd go out and we would practice. My 2 grandkids, now they learned a lot of Bible verses over the years, but right now I said, I want you to learn, we're working on the story of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. It's like I told you the other couple of weeks ago. They're getting pretty good at it. And next thing you do is, I want you to start telling it at your school. I want you, and he said, well, they said, well, they're all Christians. I said, well, they may be, but you can still practice. You're not going to just practice with a lot, but you're going to practice telling the story. And then you're going to tell it somewhere else. Now, both of them love to talk. So that's not the problem. They're not shy about talking. And they're not afraid of talking to people. But if you don't have anything to talk about, it doesn't matter. So you got to learn the story. And to me, worldwide, it has been shown to be one of the most effective ways of sharing the gospel, Bible stories. Now, what I wanted to do this week is look at Thessalonians chapter 2, so we can plug in our Bible study. And chapter 2, verse 1, it says, for you yourselves know, brethren, that our coming to you was not in vain. Not in vain. I could park there a while. I just want to make sure that what I'm doing here is not in vain. I know that you enjoy the Bible study, but vain to me is not reproducing. I'm willing to stay and do it. And I've done it for hundreds and hundreds of people in the past. So I know I can do it. And I know that it works. And it's not something that I'm just learning how to do. But don't want it to be in vain. But even after we had suffered before and were spitefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we were bold in our God to speak to you the gospel in much conflict. Now let's jump over to Acts chapter 16. You're probably already very familiar with this. Chapter 16, one of the passages that have been preached on for thousands of times over the years. It's the story of the Philippian jailer. Now what happened here is, as we talked about the other day, is that Paul was in Troas, which is across the bay, and that's where he was raised, Troas. And it says that the Lord stopped him in this passage. The Lord stopped him from going to Asia. You're not going to go to Asia. I'm going to go north. I'm going to go east. Nope, you're not going to go either. You're going to go across the way to Macedonia. Now, not to bore you with history, but Macedonia, in Philippi, is Philip of Macedonia. Now, if you ever run into him, he is Alexander the Great's daddy. And he was in that. He said this was a principal city. Now, just to say something that I never thought I would see, when we were making this long trip around 2 years ago, we went to Philip of Macedonia's Philip's grave. I never imagined my life. I didn't even know what the thing was, but the guide said, we're going to go to Philip of Macedonia's grave, the father of Alexander the Great. Even though it had been robbed many times, the gold that was in there was astounding. And it was just an amazing place to see Alexander the Great father. And that's the reason Paul said this was a very, very important city. Philip was. It was named after Philip, Alexander's dad. And so anyway, he was there. That's where he was born. That's where his grave was. Not too far from there. It wasn't right there at Philip. It's a little bit further away. And as he was preaching, Paul was preaching, he ran into Lydia. You remember Lydia? she was a seller of purple, and she was had a Bible study going on there. And verse 14 said, now a certain woman named Lydia heard us, and she was a seller of purple from Thyatira, who worshiped God. The Lord opened her heart to heed the things spoken by Paul. Now, of course, Luke is writing this. And now it happened as we went to the prayer, there was a certain girl possessed by demons. Now, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. When you're prepared, when you have a couple of stories, when you have a heart prepared to talk to people, you're going to run into somebody whose heart has prepared for you to talk to. That doesn't matter where that is. You're going to run into somebody. And when you leave, when you prepare that way, then God is going to have somebody ready for you to talk to. That's what Jesus said. When you go into a city, find somebody and stay there whose hearts God has opened. God has opened. I don't believe that you'll be able to say that God's plan is for everybody in this neighborhood to go to hell. I don't believe that. And so he's got somebody here that's open. But in 2 Corinthians, God said, my eyes run to and fro across the whole earth looking for somebody that I can show myself strong in. So God's looking for that. Are you prepared? Paul said, be prepared to share the gospel anywhere, anytime, day or night. Be prepared. So if somebody were to come up to you, would you tell me how to be saved? Would you tell me what I need to do? That will happen. That will happen. And I know over the years that we think, well, if we find the right person to lead the church, then everything's going to be all right. Well, there's a possibility of that. But I know, regardless of who leads the church, you can be ready. You can be ready to share the gospel. And you can be ready to broadcast the gospel out and see people saved, regardless of whatever else is going on around here. Now, I know that I'm maybe being a little strong, but what I want to do is to convince you that it is possible, that no more excuses, no more, waiting for the right person. I am the right person, not me, but you are. You are the right person, and you do it, and it will work. It will work. Well, anyway, they started working here, and the next thing you know, there was a slave girl in verse 16, a slave girl. Now it happened as we went to prayer, a certain slave girl possessed with a spirit of divination met us, who brought their masters much profit. She was really railing in the money. The girl followed Paul and us, and cried out, saying, these men are the servants of the Most High God, who proclaim to us the way of salvation. Now, you may not see anything wrong with that statement right there. You might even say, as I first thought years ago when I read this, hey, Paul, you want all the help you can get. If you got Satan preaching the gospel, that's even better, I think. But Paul said that aggravated him. He didn't like that. Now, it wasn't until I was in Philippi and we were walking around what's called the market place, called the Agora. It was there, and I, not braggadocious, but there's a place called the Bema. And it kind of, that's where this judgment took place, where Paul was judged. But to sit down on that rock, that judgment seat where Paul was just a kind of a shaky experience for me to see this is exactly where Paul was being beat. And this is exactly the place where he went to prison from. But this was where all this was going on. So this is not a make-believe story. This really happened. But I want to read it in the contemporary English version and see if you see anything different in what this little girl is saying. Verse 16. They don't have the verses separated quite like they do in the Bible. She began following Paul, shouting, "These men are servants of God, the Most High God. They are proclaiming a way of salvation." Is there anything different than that in what King James says? These people are proclaiming a way of salvation.
Difference in the way of salvation, in my NIV says to be saved.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's.
Well, that's part of it. The other main part of it, though, is she said, "These men are proclaiming to you a way of salvation." Our guide, who was a Greek scholar, he said there's no article in front of the way. There's no article there. It's not the. She's saying, she is proclaiming to us a way of salvation. Is there such a thing as a way?
The
Nobody.
NIV says the.
Good.
Mine says the.
You're right, that's
Mine
King
says
James.
thee also.
Well, it's added because the original, and this, it doesn't have the original. I mean, this doesn't translate it to the original. You see, a lot of times when translations come around, they will add words that they think is important to make sense. And and the is a word that's added. It's not there. In the original language, the word the is not there. It's just a way of salvation. So what basically this little girl was saying is, look, I know there's a lot of ways of salvation, and Jesus is another way. So Paul is talking about a way of salvation that may be better than the way you're working on. So it's not that there is the way, there is a way. Now, I thought about spending most of my time today dealing with why Jesus is the only way, but maybe save that for another day. But as soon as you move from Jesus is a way of salvation to Jesus is the way of salvation, you've got your hands full. All Satan comes after you. He'll let Jesus be a way of salvation without any problem. I got no problem with Jesus being a way. You can go to Jesus, you can go to Buddha, you can go to Muhammad, you can go to Hare Krishna, you can go to just about anybody. There are all kinds of a ways of salvation. And Jesus, you study Jesus and you might like him better than you do Muhammad. There's no problem there. But whenever you say Jesus is the way of salvation, I am the way, the truth, and the life, now you got problems. Now you got people that'll get upset with you. Now you got people that don't like it. I can go down here to Mitchell's and start talking, let's start talking, look at Jesus. Jesus is a pretty good way of salvation. Oh yeah, he is. Let me show you how Jesus is better, how Jesus is good, and you tell me why Muhammad's good, or you tell me why Hare Krishna's good. They won't give me any trouble at all. I mean, they'll just welcome me all over the place. But if I were to walk in there and say, look, all the other ways you think you're going to get saved, that's not going to work. The only way you're going to get to heaven is through Jesus. Now we got a fight going on in that restaurant. And got an argument going on. And so that's what Paul was so upset over with this girl. because she was just saying that Jesus is just another way of salvation. I have no problem with that. Satan has no problem with that. Let them believe that Jesus is a way of salvation, and he'll be just really good. And they can accept Jesus as a way. Like one person said, I accept Jesus as salvation. I accept Maria as salvation. I accept about 4 or 5 other saints she listed off as a way of salvation. She said, I got them all. In other words, one of them's going to work. I don't know which one's going to work, but I believe in all of them. I've got Buddha, I've got Confucius, I've got Muhammad, I got them all. In other words, I believe all of them will get me there. And one of them's going to work. So whichever one God wants to pull out of the hat, I got it. I'm in on it. And so that's what happened here. And that's the reason they got so mad and beat Paul and brought him before the high court and put him in that prison. Now, I know I moved pretty far away from Thessalonians in this, but this is just right up the road from Thessalonians. Philippi is just a little bit to the east. He walked a little bit further west. He wound up in Thessalonians, and he preached there at the synagogue, and that got him in trouble. One more little footnote, personal. Been to Jerusalem a handful of times. I never wanted to be baptized in the Jordan River. People, you can see them lined up out there all over the place, lined up to be baptized in the Jordan River. I don't care about doing that. But here they got a place to be baptized in. I said, man, now that I would do if it wasn't so cold that day. But you got a running water, a stream rather than no stagnant pond there in Jerusalem. But they've got a special little place down there where Lydia was baptized. Now that may not mean much to you if you've not been there, but to realize that this is a place where it actually happened. This is where it actually took place, where Lydia was baptized. And then she got her Bible study going. Now, the other thing where it says here, I didn't have it marked very well, but it says that God opened her heart, and her house, she and her whole household were baptized. Now, you may remember me saying, I hope you do anyway, a few months ago, we talked about it, the word oikos. Oikos is dozens of times in the Bible. And every time you see her household, that is the word oikos. That is when Caesarean was baptized, his whole oikos was saved. Now, here's another thing, and I'll hit this from time to time too. Every one of you have an oikos. Every person on the face of this earth, whether they're saved or not, they have an oikos. Oikos are a group of people that know you, and that you know you, and you know them. It's more, they know you. You may not know all the people in your oikos, but you have an oikos. That's something that everybody has, regardless of their station in life, how much money they got, how smart they are, where they live, how their age, whether they're male, female, doesn't matter what they are. That's something that I know that you have. You have an oikos. You have a group of people that know you. You have a group of people that you know. There may be more that know you than you know them. You know the word stewardship. We've heard that word many, 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 many times. Well, the word stewardship also comes from the word oikos. It means law and oikos. Now that, when I first saw that several years ago, that kind of shook me up a little bit. We're talking about being stewardship of money, time, resources, abilities. We talk about all these kinds of stewardships that we're responsible for. Well, according to that word, God has placed you and I responsible for our oikos, for the people that we know and the people that know us. That we are responsible for that. If we're responsible for money, if we're responsible for time and talents, how much more are we responsible for the people that we know and the people that know us? And according to the Bible in several places, we're going to be held accountable for those people. What did you do to help those people come to Christ? What have you done? How have you prepared yourself to be prepared to reach those people? We're going to be held accountable for that, just like we were held accountable for our money, or our time, or our talent. We're held accountable. And so that's the reason that I go ahead, and I think I've showed this to you a few times. This is my little oikos book. I've got the names of all of y'all in here, and I've got the names of my cardiac people. When somebody walks into that cardiac rehab down there, I realize that I'm responsible for that fella's eternal salvation. To the degree that God's holding me accountable. I'm not accountable for every bit of it. I'm not accountable for him receiving Christ or not, but I am accountable for me doing everything I can to get that person to receive Christ. Pray for them and to have wisdom to understand. They moved me from my 5 o'clock class to 3 o'clock class. I'd already worked over the 5 o'clock class pretty well. So, so I guess the Lord's moved me to another class. And I take it as another responsibility. The people in my neighborhood, somebody moves in, that I'm responsible for. And so that's where praying for lost people. If you don't pray for anybody else but the address next door to you, you know the address next door to you, you know the name of the street, you can write down the name of the street and the address and start praying for the person. And things happen. Things happen. I can't explain it, but things just happen. One day in this new street that I moved in on, I walked outside and there was somebody's booklet, a calendar booklet, laying on the ground on the driveway. It fell out of their car. Somehow or other landed on the street. I picked it up, and I do not take that as an accident. I had the address in there, and I went to that house to talk to them, see how far I can get. Couldn't get very far, but I said, Lord, I'm going to go as far as I can go with them, get it as far as we can go. So, and I know that you have that desire. What I'm concerned about is, do we have the ability? Do we have the wherewithal? And then it just, you don't know what it does when I hear Don say that he asked somebody, what's your favorite story? I mean, that gives me juice to go on again. And so I don't want to sound too harsh. I don't want to sound too, with the cattle prod.
Authoritative.
Huh?
Authoritative.
Yeah. But just give the Bible story, the straight Bible story. And I know that you would get enormous joy. You have no idea how the joy you would get telling Bible stories. That's the reason I ask, have you told any Bible stories? You may have. So we'll just keep going. And, keep on going. Any questions?
Brady, you wanna wait till, there's a few people out today to kind of do this again to kind of get our response to
Sure.
meeting at another time? Or-
Yeah, that'd be perfect. And it won't be, I'll make it sound, the one thing I'm trying to do is to say that this is not hard. It's not hard at all. And I've told that over and over again when I did evangelism training. People said, this is not hard. I said, no, it's not hard. It's not hard at all. And that's the biggest thing to overcome, is that it's not hard. So, wherever you move to, wherever you go to, whatever happens, you carry this with you forever. You're doing this forever. Okay. Well, that's my exhortation for today. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the day. Thank you for our time together. Help us, Lord, to always have our eyes open, as Paul said, that he might share the gospel with boldness, and he might be prepared everywhere he goes, with every person he meets, to share the gospel in such a way that a person would be able to understand. For we pray in Christ's name. Amen.